So, depending on what your average is, I've got a couple tips at every level to help you get up to the next one. There are no shortcuts in truly improving, and this isn't some fluff video where I'm going to work angles or just tell you simple stuff like make your spares. I think people get overwhelmed with the amount of information and more specifically misinformation that's confusing that can derail them. So, I'm going to tell you what's most important to focus on, where you're at, so that you can either get going the right direction or even get out of your own way. While there are always exceptions or ways for people to snipe or nitpick, these are general suggestions for most people on most regular league conditions. This isn't a sport bowling or specific technique video. This is to point you the right direction with simple and effective goals to help you wade through the nonsense. This is also going to be more of an outline. Each of the average ranges could be a video in and of itself actually teaching the topics I'm talking about, but I have plenty of other videos that have already covered and gone in depth about all the things that I'm going to be talking about. So again, we'll keep this simple and easy to follow, but I would recommend hitting my classroom series that goes in depth about several different topics. If I'm talking about it here, I've done a video explaining it. I'm not just going to say, oh, well, you just need to learn about this and then not tell you about it. Plenty of good teaching videos from me and others on everything I'll be talking about. I also guarantee that there's something for everyone to learn here at every point too. So even if you average 200, you might find something that I talk about for the 160 crowd that is applicable and helpful. So don't just skip down to where your zone is at. You might be surprised. So let's start with the 150 and below crowd. Your biggest roadblocks are going to be coordination and the unknown. It's very tempting to get into the tech and the equipment, and everyone's going to tell you something different. It's very hard to figure out what's right and who to listen to, but when people start out doing something, where do they start? The basics. Whether you're learning a sport or an instrument or whatever, you need to understand what you're dealing with and start developing basic fundamental skills first. Most of you watching will probably know I used to be right-handed but had to go lefty due to an injury. While I started at a high mental level and could have just hit the ground running, I couldn't let go of the ball the same way twice at first. Basic coordination was my roadblock, so I made it as simple as possible. I just started bowling with a plastic ball. Instead of trying to fight with controlling a reactive ball that hooked, I knew the better idea was to let the coordination and strength build up at its own pace. I was able to stay slow and easy, making sure I could get a good roll on the ball and get it going the right direction more often than not first, eventually graduating up to weaker reactive balls and getting stronger and stronger as my ball speed went up and I was able to handle it. Now, plastic may be a little extreme for you. I'm not saying go out and get a plastic ball, but it depends on who you are. You may actually be stuck where you're at right now because you're causing your own inconsistency and don't know it. If you struggle with speed and have been talked into too strong of a ball, you could be bowling much worse than you actually are and even developing bad habits because you're fighting a ball that's hooking too much, where if you got something you could control instead, you could focus on making accurate shots instead of chucking the ball down the lane. Most regular conditions you're going to bowl on don't need very strong equipment anyway. Most leagues are like playing a par 3 golf course. You're not going to need a driver and woods and long irons. You're only bowling on medium to lighter oil conditions, so you're not going to need heavy oil bowling balls. So ask yourself what type of bowler you see yourself as. Do you think your natural skills lean more towards being somebody that walks it nice and easy down the side, or do you see yourself more as a power player? To even just enjoy the game, even if you don't intend on going pro or getting into it hot and heavy, you still need to be intentional about what the point is. You may not care if you ever average over 170, but there's a way to average 170 or have fun or average 170 and still be miserable. So to recap, figure out who you are and either start out with a plastic ball or get something entry level like a Vibe, Rhino, Max Thrill, Hustle, or Craze and get out and just work on just building your basic coordination and becoming consistent. Stripping away the nonsense and just working on the basics to start will not only keep you from becoming frustrated, but it'll also help you figure out which direction you need to go next. Next, we'll look at the 160 range. At 160, you probably still need to work on a lot of the things I just talked about, but at 160, you're starting to get somewhere. You're not really stringing strikes yet and are missing a couple spares a game, but it's really easy to say something like, we'll buy a couple more balls and get some work in on your spares. Practicing is a given. It's so obvious that it shouldn't need to be said, but I never really hear anyone talk about being smart and creating more favorable situations for yourself. It's a lot easier to make spares if you're leaving yourself easier spares to pick up. At this average, I see a lot of people that are just erratic and making it harder on themselves. It's one of those things like in golf where it's better to hit a ball 150 down the fairway than 200 into the trees. At this point, you need to start understanding what you're bowling on so that you can take advantage of it. Oil is invisible, you can't see it, but you can tell where it is and where it isn't by how your ball reacts, and bowling on easier conditions is completely counterintuitive. I had an older guy who was 60-ish that got back into bowling. He'd been out of it for 30 years and he just never could. He never bowled on a house shot before, and he just never could understand why throwing the ball further right as a righty made it go further left, because it just makes sense that if the ball is hooking too much, you throw it further away from the pocket, it's going to get it further down the lane, right? Wrong. The way forgiveness is built into bowling conditions on for league is that there's more oil placed on the lane towards the middle and less towards the outside. So if you miss to the right, there's less oil, so the ball can grab more and hook back up to the head pin. Conversely, if you miss to the inside, there's more oil on the inside, which will keep the ball from overhooking, so it will slide more. I also have videos talking about lane conditions and how they're built, so I won't drone on about it here. But I see a lot of people that are starting to develop some consistency get stuck by how badly they're playing the lanes. And this is why it's important to keep your equipment inventory low at this point. You need to learn how to control and manage one ball, because adding in equipment and layouts and all that creates too many variables for you to track what element is causing what. You still need to keep it simple at this stage, but when you begin to understand what you're bowling on, how to identify it, and how to adjust, you'll then be able to make more relaxed, more consistent shots that hit the pocket more often and leave you easier spares to convert more often. 170 range, here you're starting to make some real progress, believe it or not. But the two biggest problems I see here are converting corner pins and more difficult spares and trying to juggle too much. You've likely had a couple bigger sets or bigger games. At 170, you are capable of putting up the occasional 230 and hitting 600. And that gets too many people a little too excited. And this is where they start to push it too much. But this is where I think you need to go the opposite direction and really reinforce the basics. While I think that you can start adding pieces of equipment, your problem here is on the fringes. And this is the average where I think people hold themselves back by just trying to do too much. It's not that the high games aren't high enough, it's that the low games are too low and happen too often. This is the average where you might go 200, 200, 140, because while you're starting to be able to take care of favorable situations, or when the conditions are starting to be able to take advantage of favorable situations, or when the conditions fit your game, you still struggle with transition and making decisions on adjustments. You're most likely too hesitant to make adjustments because you don't know what to do. You don't know what's going to happen when you do, because you probably have too many bowling balls with too many layouts that you don't fully understand yet, in addition to not having that great of a grasp on lane conditions and especially transition and how to pay attention to that. There's typically a lot going on here, but I think it's the simplest place to be. You're going to be missing more corner pins because you're probably leaving more corner pins. And yes, I know this is a make your spares type of comment, but here's how you fix that. Too many people go out and practice throwing strikes and picking up whatever pins they leave. But if you instead start by shooting the corner pin first, then throwing a strike shot, you get two birds with one stone. Some centers have machines and scoring systems that allow you to just set up a pin or a combination so that you can shoot them repeatedly. But this technique works regardless. And I think it's more game action type of situation. Drills and repetition are great, and there's a place for them. But in a regular situation, you're going to be going back and forth between throwing strike shots and picking up spares. This is kind of like shooting free throws at the end of basketball practice. Anybody can line up fresh and knock them down, but after a couple hours of drills and running and scrims, when you're worn out, it's not quite so easy, and that's when you need to clutch up on them the most. It's really easy to go out and shoot nothing but 10 pins and get in a nice rhythm and then go flag half of them in league because you're going back and forth. Shooting the spare first and then the strike shot maximizes your game time because you get a spare shot and a strike shot in every frame. And I'm going to expand on this because it's most of my point for the 180 average range. But to wrap this up, I still think you need to keep it somewhat minimal on equipment. You need to try to make adjustments with the equipment that you have so that you can learn when it's best used, where it's best used from, what you can do with it, what you can't do, and when you're out practicing, practice better. Double down on what you did at the 160 level. Try to develop your physical skills, because while equipment is important and it can help, you don't want to depend on it, because when you do have to rely on your physical skills and knowledge to bail you out and you don't have them, that's when you're going to have a good set going and then fall off the planet. At the 180 range, you're really getting there. And this is the point where I think a lot of people just skip over 190 and go straight to 200. There's a point where things will come together and you will make a 20 pin jump overnight. And I think for most people, it's right at about 180 because you can't just average that without being somewhat consistent. And it really depends on whether you're doing it through spares or strikes. Either way is okay because you're naturally going to become a little deficient one direction or the other. If you start striking more, you're just naturally not going to shoot at as many spares. So it's kind of normal to miss the ones you leave. It's like when you see a good bowler having a crazy night, maybe they get on a run and throw 15 strikes in a row and then leave a 10 pin. It's not terribly uncommon for them to flag it because they haven't shot at a spare in an hour and a half. On the other side, you could be at 180 making most of your spares and only having one open a game, but you just can't put any strikes together. This is the point where you need to disassociate score and performance. I've thrown some 190 games that were better than some of my 300 games. Matter of fact, I came back from nationals one year really sharp and I went 289, 279 my first two games back in league. And then I shot a clean 190 something last game because I left everything in the book. I left the entire back row at least once, plus a couple 6-pins. This was lefty, so 6-pin for me is righty 4-pin. The pins just refused to go down the last game, but I threw it every bit as good as I did the first game. Sometimes bowling is unfair, and sometimes the pins will tell you when you're doing something wrong, but sometimes they just won't go down. And if you pay too much attention to your score, you could get really mixed up. 230s in practice don't matter, and this is where I'm picking back up on the practicing strategy. You need to get used to seeing individual shot-to-shot results independent of the score tied to them. Pick up your corner pin first, or maybe even go the opposite direction and shoot at the opposite one if you're having trouble with it. Maybe shoot the 310, lots of stuff you can do. You also don't need to have a full rack to throw a strike shot. Sometimes it's important to have them all up there so that you can see how the ball's going through the pins, but at 180, you're not worried about that yet. You're worried about just getting to the pocket consistently. Too many people here start to get excited about getting up to 200 and shooting 600s more consistently because those are a couple magic numbers. And I can tell you that the more you care about the numbers, the harder it's going to be to hit them. This is where my 20 pin jump was. The very last week of league, my first year back to bowling, I'd gotten a new ball, the Storm Trauma. Now, for backstory, I'd bowled for a couple years when I was 11 or 12, so I wasn't starting dead fresh, but I didn't bowl again until I didn't bowl after that again until I graduated high school. So I considered that my first real year doing more than just killing Saturday mornings, chucking a 10-pound Kmart ball down the lane. Anyway, I'd been out to practice several times with it the week leading up to the last league day and shot a ton of scores with it, and I was ready to just put up a big number going into summer. Naturally didn't go well, and I shot 180 out of the gate. And despite my average being 175 at the time, I was still really disappointed and upset because, of course, I was #typical bowler. I thought that was it for the year, so I just kind of gave up and started walking it down the side. All of a sudden, I started putting some things together and ended up shooting my highest game ever at 257 game 2, and then I followed that up with my new highest game ever of 268, and of course, naturally, that meant I ended up with my best set ever, my first 700 at 705, beating my previous high of 632 by a ton. The point is that when I stopped caring about the scoreboard and stopped trying so hard and just tried to make good shots, the scoreboard took care of itself. The key thing at 180 is to stay the course, work on your problem areas, work on your consistency, and don't let the scoreboard be your barometer. Now, plenty of people still end up at 190. Maybe you skipped 180 instead. The 190 to 200 is where the stall usually happens. Anybody that's ever smoked a brisket knows about the stall. It's a point you get to where your progress starts to level out because you're at the point where more significant steps need to happen to move on. Some people may even top out here. It's not in everybody's DNA to be able to develop the coordination to go any further. Some people don't have the power. Some people don't have the time. Some don't have the interest. Some don't have the cash flow. And it takes at least a couple of those to push ahead. Some people can overcome coordination by setting themselves up well with equipment, getting mentally strong, and having a good understanding of conditions and how to make adjustments. This is actually a key to most higher level play. It's not being dead accurate or perfectly consistent. It's understanding how to create forgiveness and understanding how to make the game easier so it's not so physically demanding. If a less accurate bowler knows how to work angles to give themselves 4 boards of room to work with, while a more accurate bowler depends on their skill and only has two boards of miss room, the less accurate bowler might actually be set up better for success. Spray and pray is actually a viable strategy sometimes. Bowling is stay behind the line and knock the pins down. It doesn't matter how it happens. You don't get style points. You don't get any score multipliers for throwing more consistent shots. The pins either go down or they don't, and that's it. This is the point where you're not going to get any further without learning how to string strikes. This is also the point where I think you should start learning about equipment and layouts, or at least start going heavier that direction. It's not that you can't do it sooner, it's just that it'll be less confusing and feel more natural, and you won't needlessly confuse yourself by biting off more than you can chew. By now, you should have a solid understanding at least of the conditions you bowl on, how the couple balls you own work. You should be somewhat physically versatile or have some tricks in the bag, but there's some things that you just can't do, or that are a lot harder than they should be if you don't have the right tools. You can pound a nail in with the butt of a screwdriver, but it's a lot easier to do it with a hammer. It's a lot easier to add in equipment after you've learned concepts than it is the other way around, because when you run into trouble with equipment, you can at least then revert back to the basics and keep your head above water. However, there's only so far you can get without it. There's only so much you can do without power tools, only so deep you can swim without an oxygen tank, only so well you can golf if you only take 3 clubs with you. And yes, I know 10 cup, but I'll talk about that later. We're still in the 190 range right now. Remember, I took 2 balls to league all summer. One of those was just to balance out the bag, and I averaged 225 with the wrong hand. So yes, it can be done, but you do at a certain point have to complicate things specifically so you know how to simplify them, but you don't want to complicate them before you know how to complicate them. 200 kind of ties it in here, so I'll hit that marker while I keep talking. Once you understand how things work, it's then easier to add. It's like once you know how to juggle and get that down, adding more isn't too bad, but if you just start with 4 or 5 balls to begin with, it's going to be a nightmare. Again, once you get some coordination locked down, basic concept of lane conditions, transition, how bowling balls generally work, so on and so forth, then new balls that do different things feel more natural. Oh, this one hooks more than the last ball. I can actually adjust to that fairly easily. Oh, this one's really sharp down lane. I know how to adjust to that too. Oh, the lanes are kind of inconsistent to start. I should throw a more controllable ball until I get into a little transition, so on and so forth. Now, these are a few things that you can start doing virtually whenever you can track them, so it's never too early to start doing these next couple things I'll talk about, but it's almost a necessity to start doing them at this point. Every bowling lane has its own subtle characteristics. Every pair has its own personality, and you're not going to be bowling against the same people all the time. Paying attention to what typically happens on each pair you bowl on, and more importantly, why it happens, is information that can help out, and some people never realize it. Bowling against different people will make the lanes transition differently, and throwing different equipment will make the lanes transition differently too. You may think, man, the lanes always start out really oily. I need to throw a really strong ball and sand it, but you might go too far and end up screwing yourself later. At a center I bowled here in town years ago, they went to something called Lane Shield before they transitioned to synthetic from wood. Lane Shield was a thin protective covering over wood lanes meant to extend the life of them once they got down to the last resurfacing cut. Lane Shield was pretty soft and high friction, but it didn't end up lasting nearly as long as it was supposed to. So after a couple years, they had to dump a bucket out there, oil the lanes heavily, to keep stuff from hooking off the planet. The problem was that people couldn't get the ball to hook the first game, so they'd chalk up the strongest ball they had, but by the end of the night, they'd have wrecked the lanes and everybody was screwed. I didn't have a problem with Lane Shield because instead of going 240, 200, 160 like everybody else did, I slow rolled it from a little further right to start. This was still when I was righty, by the way, but I'd play a little straighter and be a little softer with still a stronger ball, but it was either shiny or didn't have much surface on it. I was usually 210 to 220 the first game, but when the lane started transitioning, the transition came to me. So my scores typically went up. I'd usually go 220, 230, 240 because I let the friction come to me instead of chasing scores and hook so hard right out of the gate. And those couple years were the best scoring years of my life, actually. At this point, to get over the hump, you really need to start learning at least different ball reactions and shapes. If you don't want to get into tech and layouts and prefer to just leave all that confusion to your pro shop, that's perfectly fine too. Pete Weber knows exactly jack shit about cores and layouts, but he knows exactly what he needs to see to get the work done. But you do need to move that direction. You also need to pay attention to who you're bowling, what they do to the lanes, and learn about the lanes themselves and their characteristics. Lane conditions can trip you up sometimes. Just because a pattern is 35 mils on paper, like Team at Greater Ozarks this year, doesn't mean that you won't still be playing fourth arrow lofting the heads with the weakest ball you brought because the lanes are so high friction. 210 is another level that tends to get skipped over because once you hit 190 or 200 and the corner pin conversions start becoming more automatic and you start stringing strikes, it's easy for everything to click all at the same time. Bowling's scoring system is part of that. Strike strings are multipliers, so 6 strikes in a clean game, all spread out, can be 190 something, or it can be 240 if you put them all together. If you can stay clean and put a turkey somewhere, that's 210. And if you've worked your whole way up to where we're at now, you should have the toolkit to at least pull your floor up, and that's the most important thing. My ceiling is actually pretty low left-handed. I averaged 218.5 in my scratch draft league over this last winter, but my high set for the year was only 726, and I only had 5 sets over 700 the whole year. It's kind of hard to average basically 220 and rarely shoot 700 and only scrape it over the wall at that. I averaged that though because my low sets weren't that low and they were very infrequent. The absolute best way to raise your average is to raise your floor, and you do that by doing all the things that we've already talked about. Develop yourself the right way, stay patient, don't chase scores, they'll come in their own time. Focus on doing smart things and fully learning the step in front of you instead of chasing. I'm a lot better and more complete of a bowler left-handed than I was right-handed, even though my coordination lefty still leaves something to be desired and I still have work to do. There are definitely some holes, but I think anyone that knows me will tell you I throw it quite a bit better lefty than I did righty. Coordination can always improve, but fixing fundamental flaws is much harder, and that's exactly what my focus is because of my skill set lefty. I know coordination is going to be my major bone of contention, so I've actually worked on understanding the side of the lane better, and I've dropped my rev rate and upped my speed a little to both fit my abilities and the side of the lane better. I focus more on keeping myself out of trouble and staying in the pocket, and that's the reason I average 220. The ceiling is only going to be so high right now, but there's a lot of things I've done to keep the floor high to compensate. I may not get any better. I'm in my mid 40s now too, and had another setback with the pinched nerve thing. I'm fine now. But I'm telling you that I really only have 200 average coordination. The other 20 pins is all upstairs, and I'm still only 75 or 80% on my 7 pins too. If I was clean, I'd be 225. Anyway, I think the biggest key here is tightening things up, focusing on eliminating the mistakes and making the game simple so that even if your big games and sets don't get any higher for the time being, pulling your low games and low sets up will be a major factor in not only pulling your average up, but also a crucial skill for keeping your head above water when things get rough. Now we're at 220. This is kind of what's considered scratch in today's game. Now, through the miracle of easy lane conditions and strong equipment, you're going to have some people that average this in your leagues that may not have a clue. They may just throw it really well or really match up well with your center. They may not really do anything or be good at anything that I've talked about, and you may even feel attacked. Again, like I said, though, score doesn't necessarily reflect skill or performance. A house bowler may be just that. They may struggle when it gets rough or when they go literally anywhere else. That's where the term house bowler came from. And a big part of the fun of bowling for me and a lot of other people is getting away from the weekly grind of league and going to tournaments. I have several places I go every year, and while I could take or leave league, I like going to Wichita for the Southwest tournament every year. I like going to Tulsa for GTO. I like going to Springfield for Greater Ozarks, and I've recently added Pennsylvania for the Dutchman into the rotation. And while I'll go to these tournaments, no matter how I end up bowling, it's always nice to bowl well and catch a check. So I don't have the same, because of the fundamentals and everything I've already talked about, I don't have the same relationship with these tournaments that a lot of other people do who can put up scores in their home house, but can't ever seem to do well out on the outside and always talk about how hard all these relatively easy tournaments are. 220 is typically a combination of good fundamentals, good knowledge, and an ability to put together some strings of strikes more frequently, though you might be here while still kind of being on the edge. Some people figure out how to really take advantage of favorable situations, but still get lost sometimes, and that's okay. Like I said, everybody has a point where they make the big jump, and when you do, you're going to be somewhat soft or fragile at that bigger number. I was that way lefty. I averaged almost 230 a couple years ago before coming back down to reality. It's all okay, though. This is the point where you should have at least one of these things in your wheelhouse: the ability to grind and keep your floor low, or the ability to really take advantage of favorable situations. If you're going to bowl tournaments, you need one of the two. It's nice to be able to grind out a check when they're tough or when everybody else is struggling, but it's also nice to be able to put up a huge number when the stars align. And if you can at least do one or the other, you're going to be successful more often than not in both leagues and tournaments. You might say, okay, great, but how do I actually do or accomplish this? We're getting a little too vague now, but that's making it too complicated. You do this as a byproduct of everything. These things happen as a byproduct of everything that we've already talked about. You have to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. It depends on your game and an understanding of which category you fall into. I'm not a big number type of bowler. I'm a keep my head above water type of bowler. I understand that and I lean into it. You always want to work on your deficiencies, but you should be smart enough by now to understand what your identity is and to feed into that. 230 and up are all big numbers that require the whole package, and I can speak on this because I had a handful of years at 230 plus as a righty. I actually almost hit 240 one year. The absolute biggest hurdle here, though, I think is pride, and it follows what we just said. There are a lot of bowlers I see that should or could be here that often get accused of sandbagging because you look at them and you just can't figure out how they don't average higher than they do, and it's usually one of two things. It's either missing one key component that we've already talked about, whether it's trying to make it too complicated, being really bad at spares, too into equipment, so on and so forth. There's usually one major deficiency, or they're too proud to knock the pins down. What I mean by that is too many people don't want to just put up big numbers. They want to look good doing it, or they want to do it a certain way. For some people, it's not good enough to just abuse a favorable situation. They want to be abstract or able to do wild or extreme things and be seen almost more for their toolkit than for their success. We've all seen people that get too creative or that want to loft the gutter when it's not necessary or play really extreme angles or impress who they're bowling against with the sideshow of their bowling rather than with their score at the end of the game. We've all been there too. We've seen someone doing crazy things in league or at a tournament and then looked up and saw, oh, wow, how did you only shoot this or that? The bowlers at this level should understand that it's time to knock pins down. Calling back again, you don't get style points, you don't get accuracy points, you stay behind the line and you knock the pins down. That's bowling. Sometimes you get screwed on great shots and get breaks on bad ones, and the best are able to shake that off and recover from the screw jobs and take advantage of the breaks. How many times have you seen better bowlers maybe start off with a couple opens, but then be able to throw six in a row to erase them? A lot of lower averages will see a couple splits to start a game and automatically think they're going, man, it's going to be a rough game, or they start pressing or trying too hard. But higher averages will forget about it and do the math on what they can still get to if they go off the sheet. The biggest roadblock or hurdle here, I think, is just mindset and a little practice. And I could apply that to myself. I've kind of relaxed into accepting my situation. I don't practice. The only 7 pins I shoot are in scoring situations. I don't expect to be competitive, so I don't really get up for tournaments. I kind of show up and take what I get. Sometimes the left is good and sometimes it's not. The kind of crapshoot or gambling aspect of that takes my head out of it somewhat because it's like, why grind just to show up and be blocked out sometimes anyway? I'm in my 40s throwing the ball with the wrong hand. I've spent most of my free time and money over the last decade plus making bowling videos. I'd just like to put bowling down and do other things. It's like, okay, sure, that's understandable, but you can also clearly see that if I still average 220 already, despite all that, 230 is right there if I want it, and I understand exactly what's keeping me from it. Too many people don't understand what's keeping them from it, though, and too many people do. They're just too prideful to take the cheap or easy way out. Well, I don't want to be one of those bowlers that just takes advantage of the situation. I want to earn it through making shots. I get that, but that's also stupid because somebody else will just knock the pins down and collect the money while you're standing off to the side saying, I don't get it. All they did was just kind of spray it down the side and throw pins everywhere. That's not bowling. Yeah, it is. They knocked down more pins than you did. That's the point of bowling, to knock the pins down. As soon as you make it about anything more than that, you're going the wrong direction. And yeah, sometimes it does get a little complicated to make that happen. But as long as you keep that in your sights, you'll keep climbing that hill. I know it's unfortunately difficult to know which videos to watch, which people to listen to, which people to trust. Finding a good pro shop is hard, and that's probably the biggest overall issue with helping people learn and progress no matter what their average is. And while, again, I have a lot of videos covering most, if not all of these topics, the pro shop thing is tough. I wish I had a comprehensive list by region that I could forward to you. The other issue is that everyone is different, so what works for one person may not work for you. So just because somebody suggests something and it happens to work, that doesn't mean they know what they're talking about, and vice versa. You have to listen to other people, but you also have to listen to yourself too. The best coaches and suggestions and direction will help you improve what you already naturally do. That's about the best advice I can give you to help navigate things. Thanks for watching, and may the strikes be with you.